Imagine if the very strategies you employ to achieve success are the same ones holding you back. What if the relentless pursuit of excellence is paradoxically your biggest barrier? By the end of this episode, you'll discover how to break through self-imposed limitations, identify and operate within your unique genius zone, and transform your relationship with time to enhance productivity and well-being. We'll begin by exploring the concept of the upper limit problem, something I certainly wish I understood as a teenager, and how it manifests in high-achieving individuals. Next, we'll delve into practical steps to uncover and thrive within your genius zone. Finally, we'll discuss the revolutionary idea of Einstein time and how mastering it can lead to unparalleled success without the accompanying stress. For those eager to delve deeper into aligning their unique talents with their educational aspirations, consider joining our specialized coaching program at The Advisory. Through the admissions roadmap, our team provides personalized guidance to help you identify your genius zone and strategically position you or your child for admission into your top choice colleges and graduate programs. Remember, true success isn't just about hard work. It's about aligning with your natural gifts, skills, and talents and making informed decisions that pave the way to a future full of intentional success. Stay tuned as we embark on this enlightening journey with Dr. Gay Hendricks, Stanford PhD psychologist and author of over 40 books. He'll offer insights that could completely redefine your path to success. He certainly has for me. Hello and welcome. It is my great pleasure to have Gay Hendricks on the podcast today. Gay is a renowned psychologist, best-selling author, and expert in personal growth. He's written over 40 books, many of which I have read, including The Big Leap and The Genius Zone, which have helped countless individuals overcome self-imposed limitations and step into their highest potential. Besides that very brief bio, which cannot encapsulate the full breadth of your genius, Gay, is there anything else you'd like to add, including that you also write mystery novels or any other fun tidbits?
Well, when I was in college, I was a DJ.
Oh, I didn't know that.
On the radio.
On the radio.
Yeah. I worked my way through college as a DJ on the radio. I was in Florida, where they have a lot of little radio stations, and I was at one of them for 3 years while I was going to college.
Oh.
But other than that, I think you got the bio pretty well. Katie and I have been together. We just celebrated our 45th anniversary of the day we met on January 9th. And so we've been together 45 years.
Could you start off? This is a total diversion from what I have planned, but I just love this story, and I also love your wife, with the story of how you met Katie, because it's so wonderful and it's such a unique and I think useful story for young people listening to the podcast and dating in this strange age that we live in.
Well, thank you. I'll give you a kind of a brief version, and then probably there's a longer version in our books. But when I met Katie, I had just the month before done something that I'd never done before, which is I actually sat down and I figured out what I wanted in a close relationship. I was 34 years old and I'd been through a bunch of different relationships, from my high school girlfriend, 16 to 19, and then a really troubled mistake marriage for a couple of years in my early 20s. And then with a succession of people that would go for like one woman I was with for about 4 years and another one 6 months. So anyway, what I'm getting at is I'd had a bunch of different relationships, which is pretty normal, I think, for people in their teens and 20s. But when I got to 34, I realized, wait a minute, I've been repeating the same patterns here over and over again. And so I actually sat down and figured out what I wanted. And I wanted three things. One is I wanted a relationship where both of us could be absolutely honest with each other. Nobody had to edit anything. We both agreed that we wanted to hear anything. And so telling the truth, that was my number one thing, because that had been a problem in other relationships. The second thing that really messed up a lot of my relationships, I realized, was that I wanted somebody who was willing to take responsibility for stuff that came up, that wasn't always about blame. And I'd been in a number of relationships where blame was a big thing, where I just got tired of being criticized all the time. And so I wanted to be in a relationship where both people took responsibility instead of blame the other person. And the third thing is I wanted a person who was very committed to their own creative path because I'm a writer and I get up every morning early and I write for 2 or 3 hours. And, if that's not okay with the person, if they complain about that, and I had been in relationships where people would say, hey, you go in a room by yourself for 2 hours every day, and that's a critical kind of thing. And so I wanted somebody that really respected their own creativity enough that they would never criticize me for mine.
Mm.
So, but here's the key thing. I figured this all out. I was sitting on the floor of my little cottage and I figured this out. And I said, okay, that's what I want. And then I said this really crucial thing. And this is a part that young people really ought to pay attention to. I said, if it's not in the cards for me to have what I want, I'll be happy being alone, but I'm never going to settle for less again now that I know what I want. And I don't care if it takes me 5 years or never, but I'm not going to settle for less. And so I kind of, what I call cracking the whip on the universe. I said, this is what I want. And so sure enough, a month later, I walked into a room. I was going to California to give a lecture at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, which is a place where people got their doctorates in transpersonal psychology. And so I'd been there a number of times before to give lectures and workshops. And this time I came and I was going to give a lecture, I think, on Friday night. And then Saturday, I was going to do the seminar Saturday and Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was maybe 50 or 60 people there. And they were in a big circle. And that's the way they did things at this particular school. And so I looked around the circle just to kind of get a sense of everybody's energy. And when I got to Katie, I didn't know her name at the time, but it was like she looked to me like a Christmas tree compared to everybody else. She just had a light to her.
She still
And
looks like that to me when
oh, yeah, she really does. And even more so now. But then, I mean, it was just so beautiful. And then I didn't know anything about her other than that, except that I knew that she was not only getting her PhD there, but she was also the movement therapy professor there. She was working for part of her degree or tuition. Anyway, I made a note to myself that on the break, I wanted to see if I could get over there and meet her. And on the break, even before I could do that, she came across the room to ask me a question. And we cannot to this day remember what the question was because even before she said anything, I said, I have to tell you, I'm very attracted to you, even though I've never seen you before. I'm very attracted to you. And before I do anything like ask you about any aspect of yourself, I need to tell you that I'm only interested in relationships where people tell the truth, take responsibility for themselves, and are committed to their creativity. And so on those terms, would you like to go out for coffee with me? And so that was my first connection to Katie. And she certainly wasn't expecting this sort of thing. So she kind of took about 10 seconds and then she said, how about lunch? And so we went to the extreme then. Instead of just coffee, we ended up having lunch. So we've been having a delighted and delightful time together for 45 years and have been around the world the equivalent of 30 times and been on Oprah a bunch of times and other talk shows and stuff like that. So we've done all the wild and crazy things you can kind of do in this society if you're a professional book writing person. Yeah, but the main thing is those fundamentals in the relationship, being able to, speak freely, listen freely, take responsibility, no blame. I mean, just think of it. If you don't have any blame or criticism in your relationship, how much you can get done because you're not, you know, having fights and repairing fights and having more fights and repairing them. And, a lot of people live on a cycle of conflict and then a little bit of positivity and then conflict and positivity. And so they don't settle into a steady state of actually growing their love and consciousness each day. And growing your love and consciousness is essential to us as human beings. If we don't do that, if we don't become more aware of ourselves every day and more aware of others and what other people need and our own needs, if our life is not a constantly growing process of awareness of ourselves, then we can't possibly have a relationship with another person because you can only love another person to the extent that you've learned to love yourself. It just seems to be one of those truths that I think ought to be written on the wall, in elementary school, because Katie and I have seen thousands of couples now in our seminars or here in our office. And one of the big things that always comes up is some truth that hasn't been told. Or
Mm.
there's another thing that comes up all the time is somebody that's been stuck in a blame cycle for years and years and hasn't learned to take responsibility in a healthy way. But at the bottom of so many things is this creativity part I'm talking about. Because if we're not actively living out what I call our genius, then there's a part of us that kind of goes, there's a little gritty part of us that knows that we have this genius inside us, but we're not bringing it forth. And that's trouble because that's what makes us ill. That's what makes us unhappy. That's what makes us stymied in our relationships. And so I can say that not only is it a great way to start a relationship, the way I started it with Katie, but it's a good way to have a relationship even after 45 years because we still use those same fundamental tools in our own life.
Thank you for sharing that story. Yeah, it was a total diversion from what I had planned, but I think it's such a beautiful anecdote. And I do see, like, working with high school and college students and young people, this isn't really baked into our culture yet. Like, it's just sort of something everyone assumes that you just kind of know, but isn't really being taught in a mainstream type of way.
That's really true. I was very lucky in a way. I heard a speaker when I think it was I was in the 11th grade or maybe I was in the 12th grade. And I grew up in the Methodist church in Florida and in Leesburg, Florida. And every year they would have a youth day where you would go to one of the Methodist colleges or something and hear a famous speaker. And on this particular occasion, there was this gentleman speaking who was a minister in St. Petersburg. His name was J. Wallace Hamilton. And he made this incredible talk that influenced my whole life. He said, don't settle for conformity. He said, everybody's always going to be trying to sell you the bigger refrigerator, or the bigger house, or the better car, everything. And he said, enjoy life, fine, but don't get caught up in that because there's this part of you that needs awakening, that needs to stay awake. And that's your job, is to, stay away from all those kinds of things and keep your eye on the prize, which is the growth of yourself as a human being and serving other human beings. And that was electrifying to me. I'd never heard such a set of ideas in my life. I felt bad about being a misfit. What do you call it? A misfit, because I just didn't like a lot of the things that were popular at the time. And fortunately, I had a high school girlfriend that was sort of the same kind of person. We were sympathetic rebels. And so that was good. At least I had somebody to talk to. But boy, was I glad when I got to college and I found that there were, you know, other people that were sort of awake and looking at life as a journey rather than just a set of prizes to rack up. And so, once you get hooked on the transformational journey, I never wanted to do anything else except help people grow and grow myself. To me, being there when somebody's face lights up when they're aware of some new thing, or seeing a couple that's been fighting about something for 7 years and then they break through it and they see what it was all about and they reestablish a better relationship. Oh, I never, ever get tired of that, and I don't think I ever will, because you're seeing raw life energy come to life. Something that's been trapped inside an old pattern suddenly is liberated. And
Mm.
we teach a lot of body therapy too, body transformational techniques like breathing and movement and things like that. Katie is a master movement therapist, and my background is in body-centered transformation, do a lot of breathing and movement in my own work. And so the reason we do that is because nature has given us the very tools of transformation, that they are the simplest things, like telling the truth or taking responsibility or feeling something or talking about something you're feeling. Those are the fundamentals of life. That's the real nutrients of human life. And it's not something you usually learn in school. Most of us have to learn it the hard way. I always say it's like teaching driver education by when you're a senior in high school, throwing you some car keys and say, go out on the freeway and bash around, you'll figure it out. But we do that with relationships. For many people, the only relationship advice they ever hear is when the minister or the priest or the rabbi or whatever is marrying them. They'll usually say a little thing, remember that marriage is about the two souls or something. But it's never anything about what to do the day after the wedding, how to solve a common problem. I've had couples in this very room that started fighting about something on their honeymoon and continued to fight about it for literal decades. Okay. I mean, to me, that's mind-boggling. If every week somebody hit me over the head with a mallet, I'd quickly figure out something about that. I'd figure out how to duck the mallet or how to be out of the house or how to stop the person. But it's like that in relationships, though. People, like stub their toe on the same piece of furniture they've been stubbing it on for the last 20 years sometimes. And oftentimes when people get here, they've tried just about everything else. They've read all the health books. In fact, for a while, it was kind of funny. Some of the main things in my practice were other relationship therapists who were having problems in their relationships. And so it happens to the best of us. It's no matter where you are, you always have to keep looking at your own stuff.
I wholeheartedly agree. Well, I think that's sort of a beautiful transition to talking about the upper limit, which I guess to go back to your metaphor with the mallet, my understanding of it is sort of like us hitting ourselves on the head with the mallet over and over
Yeah,
for
it's like,
decades.
I'm having a good time. Whack. I'm having a really good time. Whack. I just saw it the other day. A friend of mine, a couple we really love, were sitting in my kitchen. And one of my friends talked about something she was so excited about. And just as she was finishing, she knocked her glass of water over. And she went from this tremendous moment of excitement to, oh my God, and being on her knees trying to clean up this thing and everything. Sometimes for the most innocent of moments, we go from, wow, feeling great to having something bad happen. Here's a promise to you. If you ever see James Bond in bed with a woman, know that a couple of minutes later, something really bad is going to happen. Like the one I remember is a big saw comes through the room that he's just finished making love in, and so then he has to deal with this. And kind of the hero's journey is dealing with one upper limit problem after another. The upper limit problem can be as simple as you're feeling good and then you start having a bunch of worry thoughts. Probably worry is the number one upper limit problem that keeps people from feeling good. They feel good for 10 seconds and then they start feeling or start thinking about 117 negative things. I haven't had it happen to myself a while back. I was walking down the street here in my little town of 10,000 people, which has a lovely jewelry store right in the main downtown area. And I've purchased things for Katie there, and I've walked past the window a million times. And on this particular day, they had some beautiful rings in the window. And I paused to look at them and made a kind of mental note. I want to go back inside sometime when I have more time. And I looked at the rings for maybe 10 to 15 seconds. And I started walking on down the street. And probably 10 seconds after that, I started thinking about some children I'd seen who should not have been working, carrying bags of sand up a hill in India like 40 years ago. How did I get from looking at the beauty of those stones to thinking of child labor in India that I had witnessed? And I actually thought about it later because I said, I just acted out an upper limit problem. How did I get there? And listen to what happened. As I pieced it together, I looked at the stones. And then as I started walking, I had the thought, I bet some of those stones were mined by people who shouldn't have been working because mines in Asia had tremendous problems with child labor.
Sure.
And so I had this thought, I wonder how many of those stones. Then the next thing I knew, I'm thinking about this horrendous scene I'd witnessed. And what it was, I was sitting on a bank and I was watching some kids on the other side of the bank of a river carrying stones and bags of sand up a big hill. And these kids were maybe third graders, 10 years old or something like that.
Okay.
And there was a lot of them. And
Mm.
I made some comment about it to the person who knew India real well. And I said, oh man, that makes me sick seeing these kids. They ought to be sitting in school somewhere. And the guy said, yeah, but look at those others. And there was a bunch of other kids watching the kids working. And the kids working were getting paid a rupee a day, which was at a dime at the time. So they were carrying rocks up a hill all day for a dime, basically. And he called my attention to these other kids, maybe 50 other kids. And he says, those kids want the job, but they haven't been able to get it. They're waiting to see if one of the other kids gets tired so they can carry the rocks. And I remember saying, wow, that to me as even at the time, I wasn't a wealthy person, but at least I had enough to eat that day and could travel and things like that, that how do you embody that? How does a human being come to terms with that? And so that's kind of the sequence of things I'd gone through. So how quickly the upper limit problem can come upon us. Now, you probably figured this out, I'm sure, but most of our thoughts, well over 90% of them, are about things that we have no possibility of doing anything about.
That.
Yeah. So if you think of two types of thoughts, one thought being thoughts about things I cannot possibly control or do anything about, or things that I could possibly do something about. See, a lot of thoughts aren't even in those categories because it's trying to figure out, oh, I wonder if Kim Kardashian is going to wear her red bikini this weekend at the Super Bowl or something, those kinds of pop culture kinds of considerations that a lot of people have. But about the serious things of life, like relationship and things like that, we have to start thinking, what do I have control over? What could I change? And what is beyond my ability to change it, no matter what I did? And once you start figuring things out from that point of view, you're in some good territory there. It's so one of my scientific heroes, I have several. One, I have a picture of Albert Einstein behind me, an autographed picture of Albert Einstein. But I have another scientific hero from a couple of thousand years ago, a philosopher named Epictetus. And he was very famous in his time. And he dictated a little handbook to his students. And if you translate, it's called The Art of Living. And the first part of it says, the secret of happiness is knowing that there are some things you can control and some things you cannot control. Letting go of the things that you cannot control and putting your attention on the things you can control. That's what Epictetus started off his book with, his little book of sayings. Man, if you're going to just do one little thing, that's a good thing to do. And he was considered, one of the great teachers of the age because nobody else had come up with that idea that I know of. But now, if you go to a 12-step group and do the serenity prayer, you're basically quoting Epictetus. You're saying,
Right.
God, give me the serenity to change the things I cannot change and accept the things I cannot. To me, if you're thinking about cleaning up ecology, clean up the ecology of the mind first by focusing on things that you can do something about and not just recycling old stress by thinking about things that, like the past, that we don't have any control over.
It's funny. I love this book, The Corporate Mystic, which I read last year. I was reading this before our session, the very ending, the last word about this conversation with a mystic. And the mystic says you can work out just about any difficulty you have by remembering two sentences. Number one, what is? Number two, what isn't? And a lot of people waste their time by focusing on what isn't. Just
Yeah.
to your
Oh,
point, I see this all the time with my students, and I'm in graduate school at Harvard, and everyone sits around and constantly ruminates on doom and gloom, but it's quite different.
well, I was lucky. I had a high school English teacher, Claude Taylor was his name, when I was a senior. And one day he wrote on the board, unpunctuated, what is not. And he said, punctuate this sentence for us. But to do that, we had to think about what it is it's saying and everything. And it's surprisingly hard to punctuate once you figure it out. You got to know where your commas go. But
Right.
I remember being struck by the philosophy of that, that, oh, what is and what is not. It's surprising how much people get caught up in the focusing on things they cannot change. Like how many people today will obsess about what they're going to eat or what they shouldn't eat, but in the meantime, forget to pay attention to what they're putting in their mouth, which you can control. At worst, you could even put a tape over it. But there's no way you can control your weight directly. I mean, go
Mhm.
stand on a scale and try to change your weight. Even if you take a deep breath, it doesn't budge very much. And the only way to do it is by constant, or not constant, but benign focus on what you do in eating and what you do with exercise and things like that, things that you have absolute control over. I really think that if I were going to go back and write something on the walls of my high school, it would be something about this subject, about really focusing on the things that you've got some ability to change. And one of them is your genius zone, whether you're going to spend 10 minutes today doing what you love to do or spend 30 minutes doing what you most love to do. I started out just spending 10 minutes a day doing what I love to do. And pretty soon I'm doing an hour. And that was 40 some years ago. And then by the end of the century, I was spending my days doing only stuff that was in my genius zone. So it takes a while, but it's certainly worth the work.
So my understanding, I guess, of the genius zone is this sort of space where you sort of feel like you're in flow, where work just feels effortless and it's fulfilling and it's different sort of for everyone. And the pushback, I guess, I get in my work with high school and college students is like, well, the genius zone is well and good, but my little Tommy needs to be an engineer or a doctor, or I have a plan. And what's your sort of advice, I guess, to finding this balance between living in the genius zone and letting go of the fear that perhaps if you pursue your genius zone, you'll end up, a street sweeper with no future?
Okay, well, that's first of all a great question. And let's honor the feelings and the quests that are underneath that.
Mhm.
I mean, I didn't realize it as much at the time, but when I was an adolescent, a teenager, I was really scared a lot of the time
Mm.
and scared about, was there going to be any life for me? What was I going to do with my life? And I remember my high school girlfriend, Alice, was a member of the Future Teachers of America.
Ah,
And
okay.
and she said to me when I was a senior, we were walking home from school one day, and she said, I think you have something in you that would be good as a teacher. And I said, oh God, that's all I can do to sit through a classroom for 60 minutes without screaming for the last 12 years, you know? And the idea of participating in that kind of torture just didn't appeal to me. But she said, come to one Future Teacher of America meeting with me and just find out the other kids that are there. And one of the things they had the Future Teachers of America do in my high school, and there weren't many of us, like 12 of us, but if a teacher got sick suddenly or something, they would dispatch one of us to kind of ride herd on the classroom. Or if we knew something about what the teacher was teaching, we could talk about that. But I did that one time. They called on me to go to somebody or other's classroom, and I did it. And I felt so happy after I left because some of the kids, even though most of them were would have probably thrown a rock at me if they didn't want to be there either. But some of them were asking really cool questions. And I really enjoyed being in that kind of dialogue with things. And I remember even that it was a subject that I didn't know anything about, like geometry or something, which I basically didn't know anything about or didn't want to know anything about. But, just talking to people, like, how would you use geometry in your life? If you never had any other schooling, is there anything here for you? And then they would come up with things. Three of them would say no, but anyway, the point is that she saw something in me and I decided to act on it a little bit. And suddenly I'm hooked kind of for life because ever since then, I was 17 years old when that happened, now that I think about it. And I've never really wanted to do anything else except some version of what you and I are doing right now. And I've had the pleasure of doing it for 21 years as a university professor, working with graduate students where they're usually, a dozen of them at a time, that kind of thing. So small classes. So that was wonderful. And then I've done the 10 million at a time on Oprah and that kind of thing. And I liked the heck out of that too. Being a former disc jockey, it was great being, talking to 10 million people rather than talking to 10 dozen people in Leesburg, Florida, who were listening to the radio. But anyway,
We
when
don't
I'm
have
looking
any
at,
listeners in Leesburg, Florida, so don't worry.
yeah. Well, if you're in the 10th grade now or the 11th grade or the 12th grade or something like that, I can offer you my heartfelt sympathy in a way because I was full of things that mystified me at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I was angry about a lot of things, but I didn't even know half the stuff I was angry about. And I was scared about a lot of things, but I couldn't have put a name to any of them really because I didn't know that much about myself inside. I remember that day walking home and having her say something about the future teachers. I felt something relax inside me, even though I hadn't experienced it yet. And I think people ought to pay attention to those kind of feelings more, those feelings of, oh, when something kind of makes you feel more settled inside or kind of lights you up for the first time. And I'm not talking about, the frosting on the top of your birthday cake will light you up for 20 minutes real good, but it's the deep stuff that really lights us up.
So it sounds like, in a way, you did sort of find your genius zone at 17 and have
I
been.
caught a glimpse of it. I sure did. And
Hmm.
then, like most teenagers, I put it away for a while. I got caught up in the drama. For a few years, I was really caught up with my relationship dramas with Alice. I was extremely jealous of her, but we both went to different colleges. And so I was constantly fretting about her falling in love with other people at her college, even though the colleges were only 40 miles apart. And what usually happens when we're afraid of something, it ends up happening. And so she fell madly in love and ended up getting married to somebody else and everything, which at the time put me off relationships for a while. I don't mind confessing. So, but I think a relationship expert needs a few heartbreaks to kind of figure out what the rest of humanity is going through. And so I'm sure as a teenager, now you work with teenagers, I'm sure as a teenager, you weren't a bundle of enlightenment either. You weren't ready
Oh,
to step into your position as a life coach.
certainly not gay. I saw a funny video of someone on Instagram the other day that said, marry your second husband first. And I thought, that's so brilliant. I wish I would have done that.
Me too. Boy, I could have used that advice about 52 years ago, I'll tell you. Uh,
That advice too.
But I struck gold at age of 34 and found the woman of my dreams. And since then, she and I have written, let's see, 50 some books between us and co-authored a dozen. Yes, we can say that we're two of the rare people that have written a book together and are still married.
Many. So, to kind of circle back to tie in this concept of the upper limit and the genius zone for someone who's perhaps 17 or in college, like, what is the relationship? How would you sort of explain the relationship between upper limits and the genius zone? And what is the best way to sort of navigate this without making perhaps as many mistakes as we have?
Yes. Well, yeah, we want people to navigate it. Growing up is like tiptoeing through a herd of sleeping elephants.
Mm, that's
You
challenging.
know, because if you step on one elephant's tail, they're going, "Bleh," and then, you've got a drama on your hand. And one of my old friends, Bob Proctor, used to say, unfortunately, the instructions for how to get out of the box are written on the outside of the box. And so you need some help there to get out of the box. Here's the thing. Like if you're in the ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, something like that, ask yourself, what do I most love to do? That's a
Mm,
kind of a comprehensive way to find what your true genius is. But let me give you a refinement of that. I want you to look back at what you most loved to do also before you ever went to school. Like my daughter Amanda, for example, she's in her 50s now. But when she was little, she really never liked to do anything else but art projects. Like I can remember many times, even when she was, 4 years old, I'd call her, Amanda, time for dinner. Not a sound. Amanda, time for dinner. Not a sound. I would walk down the hall to her room and I'd look in there and she would be arranging something or doing some kind of an art thing. But the way she was doing it had such concentration to it. I would say, hey, Amanda, I've
mm,
been calling you. And she said, oh, okay. And there was nothing malicious about it. It was just that she was in her world.
mm,
And I bet each and every one of us have some things like that. Now, to this day, Amanda makes her living, such as it is, as an artist. She doesn't make a great living all the time, but at least she's still making arrangements and doing things and
mm.
creating art. And so it's a different form, maybe. But I bet if you look back and any of your clients look back, the kids that you work with look back, they'll find things that lit them up as a kid before they went to school. Now, there's stuff in your life now that light you up, like if you want the latest shade of mascara or however you say that, mascara. How do you pronounce that word?
Mascara? I would pronounce
Mascara. Okay.
mascara, but tomato, who knows?
Yeah. Okay. So if your thing is you want the latest shade of mascara that Kim Kardashian is wearing, great, focus on that. But also remember, there's this deeper part of you that knows that your life is a journey and that it's a journey of awakening. And it's about a lot of doing what you love to do, also finding out what other people love to do, and gradually building your life around you and other people who are working together, doing things they love to do. So that's life at its best because, there's an old Yiddish saying that says, if you have work you love, you should ask for no other blessing in life. And in a way, there's truth
Mhm.
to that because if you're doing what you love all day long, your chances of being in a good relationship go up a lot rather than if you come in the door every day at 5:30 just hating the world, you're not going to have as big a success at home. As a matter of fact, one
Mm,
of the ways I first noticed the upper limit problem was back in the 1980s, I was working with a lot of Silicon Valley really brilliant people. I was a graduate student and then stayed on at Stanford to work there as a professor for a little while after I got my doctorate. And Silicon Valley was all around us. It was just brand new. And they had these brilliant people that are doing these breakthrough things, but they were really bad at their relationships because here
mm,
would be a typical scenario. This was the first time it caught my attention. One of my clients that I'm working with, a big executive, his
okay.
boss came in and said, like 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, hey, John, we got to go ahead on the product you've been designing. We're on our way now, and I want to give you a bonus. And so he handed my client a check for it. It was a nice check too. It was for like $130,000 or something like that. It wasn't chump change. But what it did for my client, even though he was a relatively prosperous guy, it tripped some upper limit switch in him. And he went home and had the biggest argument with his family. They'd been together 12 years, and he picked this fight that the kids got involved with and everything. So he goes from the best day I've ever had at work to the worst night I've ever had with my family. Now, what causes that? I begin to ask myself. And what causes it is that we are allergic to feeling good. We're good at feeling bad. We've been learning how to feel bad for millions of years. Homo sapiens has been around roughly 300,000 years or so, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. But over the past 300,000 years, since you and I and our folks in our background have been developing, lots of things have changed in our outer world. But over those 300,000 years, one of the things that we've adapted is really good ways at dealing with pain. If you look at the bottom of your foot, for example, you've got literally hundreds of pain points on the bottom of your foot. If any of those step on something, you get an immediate zap in your brain.
Oh, I have a son who loves Legos, and I have experienced that many times.
Stepping on a Lego at a dark moment in your life, that will do it.
Worse than that.
But that's a classical upper limit problem. You're walking along, and I remember actually, I think I wrote about this. Maybe I wrote about it in the Corporate Mystic, but I know I wrote about it in The Big Leap. Was I dropped a pencil on the floor as I was leaving the room, and I got busy thinking about the upper limit problem, and I came back and I stepped on the pencil, and it rolled, and I slipped on my foot and nearly dumped myself on my face. But those little moments, we're doing them all the time. We're always blocking our ability to feel good for periods of time. So the trick in life, kids, is feel organically good for longer and longer periods of time. There's good you can feel by taking the swipe of the frosting off top of a cake. That's a good feeling for a little while. Eating your favorite ice cream, your favorite meal, chomping down on a hot buffalo wing. I mean, that's good tasting stuff and everything. But those are going to taste good for, 20 minutes or so. And then you're not going to think about them again. But what we're talking about here are things that will absolutely define your life. And that is, how open are you to positive energy? How open are you to people making suggestions? I know I was not very good at listening to people give me advice when I was 16, 17, 18 years old. What do they know? They're like my daughter one time. She was about maybe 10 years old, and we were shopping at the local health food store. And on the way home, my daughter said, "That's what I want to do when I grow up." I said, "What?" And she said, "I want to be like her. I want to be a checkout girl at the health food store." Hearing that as a PhD father, I suddenly, okay, why do you feel that way, Amanda? And she says, "Well, because she always seems so happy. We've been in there dozens of times, and she's always happy to see us. She's happy to ring us up. She's happy to wave goodbye." And basically, Amanda was saying, I don't meet many people like that. And she said, everybody in the family that's a doctor of this or a medical doctor or a PhD or whatever they are, they all look like they're stressed out, and including you, she said, pointing at me. And I mean, it was true, though. I was at a very stressed out point in my life there, where I was building my career and I was writing books. And, it was like sitting down with her for a little while was a luxury that I didn't have much time for. But anyway, that really stood me up in my saddle there. And I said, okay, wow, that's interesting. Well, and even though she's an artist today, I think, if you really pinned her down, she'd say she still wants to be that checkout girl. She wants to be happy. She doesn't want to be in a grind of any kind.
That is beautiful. And my son, as the son of someone who's in graduate school, would probably relate. Definitely. I'd love to sort of move to this concept of easy world, which is perhaps my favorite of your concepts out there, but I think they're all interrelated. Like, in order to sort of, you got to understand the upper limit and the genius zone to then get to easy world. Could you sort of give us the layperson's definition of easy world and how do we get there? And is there some kind of free rocket ship to easy world that everyone can hop on?
Yes, there is. Think of how easy it is to change your mind, but for some people, how hard it is.
Mhm.
If a criminal and the Dalai Lama both walked into a 7-Eleven at the same time, and the Dalai Lama was there to spread peace and understanding, and the crook was there to rob the store, they're coming in with very different intentions. And so, one thing that we have to do in life is really refine our intentions. And you can set your intentions with a little tiny shift in your mind. So here's the intention. I live in easy world where everything is easy. Or consider the other alternative. I live in hard world where everything is hard.
Ooh.
Ooh,
Oh, thank you. Having lived there without knowing it, I would not
yeah.
that.
I remember there was a woman where I first got these ideas from and talked about these ideas because I recommended her book was a woman named Julia Rogers Hamrick. And I don't know if she's still practicing or not, but the idea that we could change our minds and live in easy world rather than hard world, that appealed to me because I've seen people change their minds many times about things sitting right in front of me. And as a therapist over the years, where I've, introduced some new idea that seems really simple, an idea like, I'd like to, me saying to a client, I'd like you to try accepting your feelings rather than criticizing yourself for having them. Whoa. I've seen that little idea, huge idea, change people's life on the spot because suddenly they realize, oh, I've been in an argument with myself my whole life. That's how I grew up, thinking I was wrong all the time. And now to discover that I'm just, you know, a person who goes around feeling angry and sad and scared and happy like everybody else. I've seen that be a miracle working shift of a person's mind. But imagine if you shift your mind slightly to saying, okay, from this day forward, I live in easy world. I'm going to make things easy and I'm going to do things that feel easy. I'm going to live in easy world rather than hard world. Give it a try. What's the worst that can happen? Most of us have been dealing with a lot of hard world topics for a long time. But anytime you're stuck in a difficult situation, just think, okay, what would easy world? If I were doing this in easy world, what would I be doing right now? I remember I was stuck in an LA traffic jam.
Oh, I was raised in LA, so I completely understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I was raised in Central Florida. So a traffic jam where I grew up was two guys in a pickup truck stopping to talk to each other in the middle of the road. That was it. And I also live in a little town now, well, California, that has about 10,000 people. And so there's very little traffic here. But anyway, I had to go to a meeting in LA and I'm stuck in traffic. I'm literally sitting there. And I got a phone call from Mary Morrissey, who's a friend of mine who does similar kinds of things. She writes books and gives talks and things. And she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm sitting in a Zen monastery right now called an LA traffic jam." And she still reminds me of that every time I see her today. That's what
Oh,
she has on file when she thinks of me is me saying that I was in a Zen monastery because I was sitting in the traffic jam and I've done this a million times. You get to frustrated because you want to be that place you're not yet. And that's the whole essence of the problem with humanity. We want to be somewhere we're not instead of just accepting ourselves and then figuring out where we want to go from there. So it's like we have one foot on the brake and one foot on the accelerator. So, but in this traffic jam, suddenly I realized, oh, there's no reason I need to be thinking of this as a traffic jam. I'm just where I am right now. And yes, it's true that I want to be at this meeting. I'd rather be at this meeting, but who's making that up? My mind is making that up. Yeah. And sure enough, as soon as I figured that out, the traffic began to move. So, we're always in a place where we can make a shift toward life being easier.
I've had so many cool things happen in Easy World that I could have never predicted. I'd love to end with there's this concept from Corporate Mystic, the tyranny of because, that I like, that I get this a lot of, okay, it must be nice to live in Easy World, but I can't because what's going on in this country, or I can't because children are starving, or I can't because this or that. And I hear that a lot. And, a lot of like, well, it must be just so naive. You think we can live in Easy World and death, destruction, and chaos reign supreme. So what do you say to that, Gay? What's your advice?
I say to that if you're living now or if you are living 100 years from now, life is always getting better and getting worse at the same time. Which game do you want to participate in? Do you want to be a person that makes life worse for yourself and other people? Or do you want to get aboard the train that says, let's make life better for me and other people? And 100 years ago, roughly, 60 million people worldwide maybe died from the flu. So life was getting worse. Life was getting better at the same time because, World War was just over. So what I'm getting at is that life is giving us choices all the time, what to focus on. And my suggestion is get a good focus on what's my genius? How can I express it in the world? How can I bring forth something that will make my life better at the same time making other people's lives better? That's what I've been up to. That's what you're up to. Let's get everybody doing that.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think the beauty in what you just said is that you're also making everybody else's life better. I notice that when I'm choosing to operate in Easy World, it's other people are inspired. Other people are curious. They want to join in. It's not kind of this selfish thing, even though it does start with you.
That's right. And even if it only starts with one person, it's got to start somewhere.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on. We covered so much here, Gay. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for your time and insight.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks a lot. Good questions.
By identifying and operating within your genius zone, you not only enhance your daily life, but also position yourself more strategically in the competitive landscape of college and graduate admissions. I'd urge you not to even think about colleges or majors until you identify your genius zone. If you find yourself seeking personalized guidance in this transformative process, our team at the advisory is here to assist. Through the admissions roadmap, we offer strategic planning and individualized counseling to navigate the complexities of the admissions journey. Our hands-on support includes crafting a custom school list tailored to your unique strengths and aspirations. Whether you're just beginning or well into your application process, we're committed to helping you align your true potential with your educational goals.